So once we understand how big these two effects are for regular lives of regular Americans, as historians, we need to ask ourselves, well, why did this market revolution come about at this particular time? What were the causes that brought us these effects? Well, we can pretty much narrow it down to three different things. We can talk about roads, canals, and railroads, with the secret fourth ingredient called information getting tacked on at the end. So, if we're going to start with these three big things that came about all during the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s, the first one of them would be roads like, say, the National Road. Now, if you can picture the kinds of roads that go back to the colonial times, they're basically just dirt roads, and so every time it rains, they become sloppy messes that wagons get stuck in. They're not reliable, and so that's one of the biggest factors that kept people inside that 40 to 50 mile radius. It was just so hard and so expensive to travel with goods over long distances that it wasn't worth your while. Until we start to build things like this. We've read about the National Road in the book by now, probably, depending on when you're watching this. And something like the Pennsylvania Turnpike, which was originally called the Harrisburg-Pittsburgh Turnpike. But this is what's going to make it finally easy enough and cheap enough for people who want to be able to get a bunch of things that they've made and find farther markets to sell them in, to be able to do that. If you're taking a look at this picture here of people on the National Road and you're paying attention to that's what that crushed gravel looks like in real life, which you might know if you've ever been on something like the Prairie Path down in Elmhurst or other kind of running trails that are made this way, they're way better for, well, the horses to go down, of course, and the people who are driving them down the road, but you're still just focusing in the wrong places. The economic historian's eye focuses right here on this Conestoga wagon and goes, now that's the significant development. There's a lot of stuff in that wagon that can now easily get outside that 40 to 50 mile radius and be cheap enough that it would be worth your while to try to send some of your stuff further away to other markets where more people will pay for it. And the National Road and roads like it are just the first of the three developments. Don't forget the fourth magic ingredient coming at the end called information. But this is the first of those three ingredients that we call roads, canals, and bridges. These are done the earliest, like technically in the 18-teens, and they become bigger and more spread out in the 1820s. Well, starting in the mid-1820s and going into the 1830s, we have the next development, the building of canals. And so this picture here of how they built the Erie Canal, that shortcut that's going to go from the Great Lakes to the Hudson River and be able to get people in places like, say, Illinois, to be able to get their stuff all the way to New York and even out into the Atlantic Ocean, are canals like the Erie Canal. And so, well, for a while they were pulled by horses, but then once steam engines start to get put on these canal barges, now there can be two-way traffic taking goods in both directions. And that's going to turn out to be huge. That's going to turn out to be huge for transporting massive amounts of stuff. These are apple barrels. Can you think of anything simpler than this? And look at how many can be sent out to these faraway marketplaces as long as you can do it fast enough and cheap enough that the apples are still going to be okay. That's what this canal is going to be doing. And if you're still looking at all these apple barrels stacked up to be able to be sent away, the economic historian eye is not there. The economic historian's eye looking at this picture goes right to that barge. and goes, wow, compared to the wagon we were just looking at, now there's even more stuff and traveling even faster, and that means cheaper, and that means more people are going to do it. And we're still not done with the 3 big innovations. Don't forget the 4th secret ingredient called information that's coming at the end. That 3rd ingredient is bigger and faster. They're the railroads. And as we start to build the railroads across the country, and now we're going to be needing things like tunnels going through mountains and stuff like that, it's a big, huge project that is going to pay big, huge dividends once locomotives can start taking places all the way along these rail lines. So maybe your eye goes instantly to, well, say this rinky-dink little locomotive that's up at the front, because it would be an anachronism to hear the word railroad and think about the great big locomotives that really aren't coming until the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, the kind that we can all imagine from reading stories about trains when we were little. These were the first locomotive engines that were much smaller and much less efficient, and even then they were still getting the job done. Because you guessed it, if your eye is on that locomotive, it ain't where the economic historian's looking. The economic historian is looking back here at all of that cargo. All of those great big logs that we would call timber that are so heavy. You would never try to get those over any distance longer than you had to if you had to do it on old dirt roads using wagons. But now even the most primitive railroads can get those things cheaper and faster to people around the country who want to buy it from you. And when we say around the country, we really mean around the country. Look at this network that the National Geographic Association map that I have for you is showing of things being able to be transported all around the country. If we look just at the northern half of this map, and we take a look at the roads, canals, and railroads with the different colors, look how many connections that anybody who lives anywhere near any of these can take stuff that they want to sell and get it to other places where people want to buy them. And anybody who lives near any of these places on the network can be receiving those goods and buying them from those people without ever having even met them in the process. This is a market. And if we take a look down at the southern half of this map, what you'll notice, I hope, is a pretty big absence of canals. Because as we've already read about, down south, river transportation was already a big part of what they were doing. There doesn't need to be a lot of canal building down there because the rivers really do go places and have been going places without needing these man-made shortcuts called canals. But the roads and the railroads are coming down to the south as well. So those 3 big ingredients, the roads, the canals, and the railroads, are still leaving out that magic 4th ingredient before we're done.